So our first speaker will be Professor Janet Kohllhase. Let me read a bit about her. She is currently a professor of economics at the University of Houston, where she served on the faculty since 1982. She began her career at Michigan State University after receiving a PhD in regional science from the University of Pennsylvania. She holds a master's degree also in regional science from Penn, MBA economics from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Professor Kohllhase research spanned a spectrum of topics in urban economics, including work on labor supply, housing demand, and one and two earner households, land, labor, and product market under spatial monopoly and spatial completion, local government revenue and fiscal problem, the impact of toxic waste site on housing value, and public perception and the valuation of environmental risk. She has been published in a lot of journals, including Review of Economics and Statistics, Journal of Urban Economics, papers in regional science, environment and planning, and Journal of Regional Science, just to mention a few.
This is my first World Congress, and I'm very honored to be here, and I'm very excited to make this presentation. The paper I'm talking about, Labor Force Diversity and Firm Survival, is joint with Michaela Bachmann from GIBS in Sweden. So you're going to hear some stories about Sweden, but I hope it fits in well with the conference. So my first idea to talk about is how does my paper fit into the conference, with a conference theme of social integration, regional development, sustainability. This paper basically touches all these themes partially. And one thing I want you to think about is what will long-run equilibrium look like in the world over time? Well, we get cities and areas and regions and neighborhoods and firms that are full of homogeneous groups or heterogeneous groups, or what? It's a regional issue, it's a within firm issue. And so what I'm going to do is answer these questions partially by looking at firm survival in Sweden. And Sweden is a great place to study because they have a great data set that I can exploit. So just thinking about the world and also thinking about Sweden, firms in general are facing more and more competition, rapid change over time at local, national, and regional levels. So firms have to be flexible. And if we want to think about firms' flexibility, we want to think about how firms can survive. And those that do survive are going to be influenced by internal resources, and also those that don't survive are going to be influenced by their internal resources and resources of the local environment. So our question in particular is, how is firm survival related to diversity within the firm's own labor force and diversity within the regional milieu? There's been a lot of studies that look at firm productivity in terms of diversity, but we're looking at related issue, firm survival. So we think it's an important contribution by looking beyond some of the productivity studies. So, but it's a complement to them and should fit well into that. A lot of studies, gender, their age, achieved is going to be education, occupation, that kind of thing. How do the variations in these affect the outcomes? So we also are going to look at the region that the firm is located in. So we're going to look at characteristics of the urban area that the firm is located in. So we're going to look at the characteristics of the inhabitants, not just the workforce, and just see how that affects the firm's survivals. So there's a lot of work on diversity, and there's costs and benefits of diversity. And we can think about diverse labor force may signal a milieu of creativity, innovation. Thinking about Jacobs' work in 1961, So this is a thing that we're thinking about in there. But the benefits and costs are going to vary within the firm and regionally. So let me just make a few comments about the benefits, diversity, and the cost. People think, and workers and researchers have been talking about firms with a diverse workforce might perform better. The diverse work environment might make better decisions by having different opinions brought forward. Maybe there's going to be better problem solving. So that's maybe one of the benefits of it. And there's a nice couple of papers by Fujita and Berliant and Fujita in 2008, 2009, which discuss knowledge creation and discuss that there's an optimal mixture of diversity and sort of common thinking, so homogeneous thinking. And so we're going to think about that in our work. So homogeneity may have some certain advantages. It might not just be that diversity has all the advantages. So that groups that have common backgrounds, same cultural norms, might work easier together and make decisions quicker. So they basically have some advantage in cooperation and interaction. And that might reduce firm costs. And there's been a literature on that, and one paper in it is by Costa and Kahn, 2003. And some other work has been done by Costa and Kahn and Victor, saying that locations that are heterogeneous in their residents, so the population, not necessarily just the workforce, might impose some burdens on firms because the decreased amount of engagement, civil engagement of the population, and that can cause a cost on firms. So there might be a negative there. So summarizing all these ideas, and I've not gone through the complete paper, has a lot more detail, but we expect there's both positive and negative relations between diversity and firm survival. So it's ultimately going to be an empirical question to see what effect dominates and at what level it operates, whether it's within the firm or outside the firm within the city region itself. So let's move on, talk a little bit about the data. I was excited to work with Michaela Bachmann on this because she has access to this micro data at the firm level from Statistics Sweden. And what it is annual data on all active firms and all individuals in Sweden, something very hard to get in the United States. And so what we have is employer-employee matched data. So we know what worker works at what firm and for how long. And we know how long the firm exists. So basically what we do is we construct an unbalanced panel of private firms. We don't use any government firms because we aren't modeling the government sector here. And they have to be at least active 1 year between the years 2002 and 2013. So you have over 1 million observations to start with, about over 280,000 firms. So the dependent variable that we constructed, you think about is a variable called exits. And what we're going to do is measure the number of years the firm's in the data set. We call it exit equal 1 in the year the firm exits the data set and 0 otherwise. And if a firms merge or divide, we are not counting those as exits. So you have a little bit of data. So just to give you a little bit of feeling from the data, about the data, here's the years 2002 through 2012, and just breaking down the data set into new firms, survival, exits, and total number of firms. You see the total number of firms in our data set after we've cleaned it up a bit ranges from about 400,000 to about 500,000. So it's not millions of firms after all gets cleaned up. But one thing I think is interesting to look at is each year what percent of the total number of firms are exits. And it's usually ranging between about 16 to 17%. And there's one anomaly year in 2003 where it's 12%. And some people in Sweden have been saying that they had maybe trouble coding that year, but we're still looking into why that is different. So this is just to give you the idea there is some variation in the data, and there are exits that we want to look at. So then we also constructed a lot of independent variables. We had to construct a dependent variable, and we're constructing our independent variables too. So Sweden, as you probably know, is an immigrant destination, has been in more recent years than in past years. And the share of immigrants have been increasing over time. So here's a little bit of data just to give you some feeling about immigrants, which give a lot of diversity in Sweden. If you look at the years 90 to 94, 95 to 99, 2000, 2004, 2005 to 2009, 2010, 2011, you see the breakdown. And a lot of people have come from the Middle East. Okay? So right here we see the proportion from the Middle East was about 22% from 1990 to 2011. And if you go to Sweden, you will definitely see this. I know many of my taxi drivers have been from Syria and Iran when I came there. And you can look at other countries, EU, Africa, not so many from Africa, a portion about 7% over the time period. The Nordic countries, about 12%. But again, the Middle East is the big one to think about here. And other runs into about 27%. We even have some from North America and the EU, about 9% coming into Sweden. So just to take a look at the share of immigrants in Sweden, basically the share of immigrants in Sweden about doubled between 1990 and 2011. So it's over 50%, so I think it's about 16, 17%. So that's a lot of new people coming into the country for Sweden. A lot of people think of it as relatively completely homogeneous, but it isn't now. And it's been growing and diverse. So what we wanted to do is construct variables that capture diversity in probably a more complete way or a more interesting way than some of the other measures of diversity that have been used. So we could have used other measures, but we decided that we wanted to use these entropy measures, these tile entropy measures. Oops. Something wrong. Sorry. We wanted to use these tile entropy measures because they capture a lot more of the variation and you can decompose them. So just to show you some of them, the first one we're going to talk about is cultural diversity. And the tile measure basically is a weighted sum of the logs of the ratio of the number of employees in category C divided by the number of employees in the firm I. Okay, so it's weighted up. And C is the number of categories. So for our categories of culture, we have 10 of them. So we sum over 10. And when you put a negative in front of it, because this gives you a negative number proportion, log of proportion. And the value of the index goes from 0 to log C. And so there's a range of it. And basically, the bigger the value, the more diverse your measure is. So as you saw in my table earlier, that we have 10 regions of origin. The data is not divided out exactly by all the countries. So we have Sweden, Nordic countries, except Sweden, the EU 15 except Denmark, Finland, and Sweden, then Europe, except the EU 15, the Nordic countries, Russia, and we have North America, South America, Asia, Africa, and Oceania. And so we don't have specifically how many came from the Iran or Iraq or Syria. That is a limitation of data. And another measure of cultural diversity, which is much simpler to compute, is just the share of firms, the share of a firm's employees that are born outside of Sweden. So we use that as another measure compared to our diversity measure here. Going on with our independent variables, again, these are firm-level variables. We look at the demographic diversity within a firm in a given year. And again, it's a tile entropy measure, and we have now 12 categories of demography. So the categories have come out to be 12. So you have 6 age and 2 gender. And again, E stands for the employees, firm I, and category C, same value for the index. And we continue with our diversity measures for education and occupation diversity. And we use these entropy measures, but then augment them by using a concept called unrelated variety or related variety measures. So we are taking one approach that you might disagree with, or you might agree with, is that we're adding up these two varieties, unrelated variety plus related variety, for education, and we do the same thing for occupation. We add up the unrelated variety and related variety. And there's been a bit of work on it. Two recent papers were Franken et al. 2007 and Wicks and Anderson 2016, looking at related and unrelated variety and basically firm productivity. So just to give you a bit more detail, I'll give you some equations here, some more. The unrelated variety, again, is a tile index where the piece of G is now the share of total employment for higher level G. And that's unrelated variety. Related variety says what's going on within these big G areas, so sort of subsectors. And we again do a tile there. So that's basically how you figure this out. Okay, so HG is a distribution of employees among the low-level categories J within each high-level G. And the PJ right here is the share of the low-level J's employment in the high-level G. Okay? So just to give you a sense of the diversity in the Swedish data, for the educational diversity variable, we have 27 high-level categories, and we have 354 low-level categories. So there's so many different things that people in cells they can be in. And occupational diversity, maybe not quite so many categories. We have 11 high-level and 110 low-level. So we're capturing, a lot of variation in this index. So going along with this theme about diversity, this first part I was talking about was diversity within the firms. And the second part is about diversity within the whole municipality. In Sweden, Sweden's data, administrative data, is divided into 290 municipalities. So we look at those 290 municipalities and get characteristics of the population. And again, we're talking about demographic diversity, but we're now going to call it at the municipality level, and cultural diversity at the municipality level. And we constructed these using the same principles as we did for the firms. So that's the data creation that we're doing. So now let me give you a little sense of the data distribution. Okay. So remember that the diversity measures range in value from 0 up to log of the number of categories. And so the mean for demographic diversity is about 0.4. For cultural, it's about 0.78, or 0.7. Obviously, I'll say 0.08. Education is higher, 0.5. Occupation, about 0.4. And the share of immigrants in Sweden in the data set is about 15% at the municipality level. And some other variables that we use at the municipal level for capturing just the characteristics of the regional market. So location quotient and local supply shock. So we basically want to see what's going on in the region during the time that a firm either is surviving or exiting. We take a look at the number of firms that exited the market as a share of all firms in that municipality to give us a measure of the local supply shock. And then we also control for population density, and that is measures the number of inhabitants per kilometer square in the municipality. And this is supposed to proxy for agglomeration economies or firm competition. And we can take a look at the means here. Okay, so how do we do this survivor model? Well, there's many choices, but we chose to use the Cox proportional hazard model and vector firm and municipal variables. And some of them are time invariant. You can see I subscripted by time. So like industry is time invariant. So the right-hand side variables in that X vector that you saw on that previous page, we have the firm level diversity measures, so demographic, educational, occupational, and put them all in separately because we looked at the correlations between them. They're quite high. So in our models that I'm going to show you here, we entered them separately. But then in each of our regressions, we put in cultural diversity and the share of immigrants. Okay, so those are in every every specification. Then we have a bunch of firm level controls to control for other aspects of the behavior. But our focus is just saying, hey, what's going on with diversity? How does that affect survival? But you want to control for other things that are important so you can interpret the results. That's still not working. So we control for the size of the firm, allow for nonlinear effects by putting size squared. The age of the firm, again, allowing for nonlinear effects by putting age squared. Interaction between age and size. And then we counted for whether or not the firm was a multiple establishment firm or a standalone, whether or not it was a multinational firm. We controlled for the value added in the firm, the overall education of everybody in the firm, and the experience of everybody in the firm. And then we continued with right-hand side variables for the municipal level. So we put in the characteristics of the inhabitants of the city, their demographic and cultural diversity. And then we had those municipal level controls I showed you in the summary statistics, the location quotient, local labor supply shock, and the population density. Okay. So now I want to show some of our results. And so the results are hazard ratios that I've shown in this table. And just to review for a second how to interpret them. If a hazard ratio is less than 1, that means there's a negative relation to exit, which then would flip over to being a positive relation to survival. So to look at variables that are important for survival, we're going to want to look at coefficients that are less than 1 in these regressions. And if you have a hazard ratio greater than 1, there's a positive relation to exit and a negative relation to survival. And hazard ratio equals 1, there's basically no relation to exit or survival. So I'm just putting up some of the results here. So you can see there's 3 columns, and you don't see all the variables in those because like I said earlier, I entered the diversity variables at the firm level one by one. So demographic diversity is in the first column, education diversity regression in the second one, and occupation in the third one. And all of them you can see have cultural diversity and shared immigrants. But the important thing to see here is that demographic diversity and education diversity have numbers less than 1, so that they are positively related to survival of firms. So firms that are more diverse from the age and gender grouping, more diverse from the educational grouping, are more likely to survive in Sweden. We find that occupational diversity is actually a negative impact on survival. And we were slightly surprised at that. We're still working on our reasoning for it. So we can talk about that later. But cultural diversity, which is the source of all these immigrants, is a negative on survival for all the specifications. And also the share of immigrants is. So the 2 different measures for cultural diversity, both negative on survival. And you might not want to hear that, but that didn't happen here. So just to give you some interpretation on the magnitude of these results, because this is a paper where you can interpret the magnitude of the results. One standard deviation change in cultural diversity, expected hazard rate to exit is up 6%. One standard deviation share of immigrants increase, the expected hazard rate to exit is up 2.5%. Okay, so that was just the firm level. So, on the slides, I'm just taking my table and dividing, just showing you some chunks of it. But if you take a look at the variables that we call at the municipal level, and they're all in one regression, so the firm level variables and the municipal level variables are all in the regression at the same time. We see that we don't have any effect of the demographic diversity of the municipality on firm survival, or cultural diversity. These are not significant. Okay? Location quotient is not significant. So all these, I put the stars on there to show you their significance. The ones without stars are not significant. The only things showing as significant here are the local supply shock. So if we have more firms exit, we're more likely to get a firm exiting that we're looking at. If the population density is bigger, that also is something positively associated with firm exit. And this is just summarizing what I just said, so I don't really think I need to say too much. So municipal level diversity measures are insignificant, and the variables measuring local economic environment are significant with negative relation to survival, as I said. So those diversity results are a little surprising. So we checked some other specifications, did a lot of different things. And one thing I just want to show you is one of the experiments we did was looking at, well, what if we just omit all the firm level variables? So if you think about agglomeration economies, you think the characteristics of the environment are very important. So let's show you what we found there. So if we take a look at the same regression that we did, but just omit all the firm level variables, but the dependent variable is still the same, the probability of a firm surviving, and just look at the municipal variables, they do show significant, okay? And so cultural diversity is a positive, location quotient is a positive on survival. Local supply shock still say becomes a negative, and population density is a positive. So maybe things that you more intuitively would think hold true. But once we control for the firm variables, those results go away. So we experimented with, if we just put the firm variables in by themselves, we got results exactly like when we put in the municipal variables with them. So we're going to stick with the results that we presented first as our story. So basically, I want to just talk about that last line there. So our interpretation is that the firm does select employees from the local area, but it's the workings of the diversity within the firm, once it's done that selection, that affects survival. So that's why I think we're getting the results that we got. Another problem that we have is potential endogeneity, because the way immigrants were treated in Sweden sort of changed over time. So before 1990, the immigrants were placed by the government just in a location. The immigrant themselves had no choice over it. But after that, they had some choice. So what we did was say, okay, well, maybe that would give us some variation in the diversity and see if that affects our survival rate. So what we did was divide the sample by the 1990 share of immigrants, and we used the 80th percentile high proportion areas. So we divide the sample into a lot of immigrants, and a sample with a little bit of immigrants, and just checked what happened to our regressions for the hazard rates. And the results were qualitatively the same as the full model. So we interpret this that that existing immigrants doesn't really affect the survival of the firms. So we think we're treating a bit of the endogeneity problem there, but we're still working on this. Okay, so then we said, okay, we got these results, but let's see if there's some sensitivity to things that are important for firms. So things that are important for firms when you think about it is the size of the firms. How many employees do you have? Do you think there's a big firm effect or a small firm effect? And then the regional categories. What type of region do these firms locate in? So in Sweden, there's some papers dividing the 290 municipalities into areas that are called metropolitan, so that'd be very large cities. Areas that are called urban, that are smaller cities. Rural, there's basically no city there. And sparse rural, there's not really very many people there. So we took a look at our data and divided it by that. And we just give you a little bit of sense of what we found here. So if you look at the first three columns, those are the different employment sizes. So, let me make a comment. We do have one-employee firms, but by definition, a one-employee firm is not going to be diverse. So we've estimated results for those firms surviving. We aren't including them here. So we're looking at firms that have more than 2 or more employees. So we divide it into small firms, 2 to 9 employees, medium firms, 10 to 49 employees, and large firms greater than 50 employees. And we ran the same regressions, and I'm just putting up some of the results here. And these results are all for the firm level variables, okay? And you can see there's a difference in the size of the firm and the impact of demographic diversity on the firm. So if you look at the small firms, it looks like demographic diversity is negative impact on exits or positive impact on survival. But the opposite happens for the medium-sized firms. that it's actually a negative on survival. And for large firms, demographic diversity doesn't even matter, so it's not statistically significant. And if you look at education diversity, it only seems to matter for those small firms. And again, it is a positive impact for survival. It doesn't seem to have an impact on the medium and larger firms. So there's differences across the firm size. Occupational diversity, across all the firms, same result we got before. Cultural diversity, same thing, and shared immigrants, except for the one down here, greater than 50 employees, it doesn't seem to matter, where for the small and medium, it is a cause for more likelihood of exit. Okay, so differences by firm size, interesting. Then we also look for other differences by the type of metropolitan area the firm is in, or rural area. And again, we find some differences. So if you look at the first line up there, you see that the two significant numbers for demographic diversity are for the urban and rural. So the smaller cities and the more intensely populated rural areas, demographic diversity is a positive for firm survival. And if you look at education diversity, you get the same kind of pattern. It doesn't really matter for the large cities, the metro, or the sparse rural areas, but it matters for those middle-sized ones. So I thought that was an interesting finding. And the same things hold true for occupational, cultural, and shared immigrants, so I won't need to repeat them. And I just said this. So I'm already at my conclusions. It seems that regions and firms increasingly are experiencing this changing demography of their population and their workforce, and they're going to have to be flexible in how they deal with it. So we've seen that, we think that increasing diversity is likely to be a continuing trend, not just in Sweden, but around the world. So firms have to deal with it, governments have to deal with it, and we're giving a little bit of research on our view of how diversity affects the outcome of firm survivalship. So we're just adding to the inquiry. There's a lot of room for more inquiry. And what I want to say is, how does this relate to the theme of the conference? And I think that it relates very well, because we're talking about integration by looking at diversity. We're talking about regional development by looking at survivorship. So that's it.